I'm a researcher, and my research specialty is in downtown, so that's kind of what my topic will be a little bit more about. All right, so we talk about what is placemaking, because it's a term that many of you probably have not heard about. But then I was talking about the Main Street program, which is what I did my research on as a PhD student. Then I'll talk about sort of an Oklahoma-specific focus on placemaking. All right, so let's talk about, so with this, I have two photos, kind of an example of what pulls you in, right? What kind of place is more inviting? We have this one right here, or this one. This one over here. Anyone know where this is? Woodford. Good one. That's Woodford, right? And there's nothing wrong with this intersection of Woodford, right? This is a place where people do a lot of shopping, very beneficial community, be able to get your goods at lower prices and be able to easily park. But places like downtown, and this is a photo I took when I was here a couple months ago, are places where we have traditionally, historically, not only invested our dollars and cents into buildings and businesses, but also into our culture, our heritage, and our community. It's where a lot of events take place. It's where our government is seated. It's where our services are usually located. A lot of rural communities, that's where the co-op or the grain elevator is also kind of adjacent or located. So downtown has a value beyond the dollars and cents that a place like this, while useful in part of our lives, is usually not always to invest for the same amount of value. Okay. So I want to talk about filled capital. You all know capital as the idea of it's money, right? Something you invest in. So you have a capital investment. It could be dollars and cents. It could be stock options, whatever. We kind of understand that use of the word capital. But there's also such thing as filled capital. You've probably heard of other uses of capital, human capital. Sometimes people talk about human capital as how many educated souls you have working in your business, or your social capital, how many connections you have, what's the value of those connections. Well, there's also built capital. That kind of comes from what's the value of the things that are built in your community, right? Things that God didn't put there, we put them there with the materials God gave us, right? So it's the built environment. So things like buildings, infrastructure, housing, telecommunications, utilities. And there's three dimensions that matter when it comes to building built capital. How old does it work, right? How functional is it? Is it really old? How distinctive is it? Sometimes that doesn't matter very often, right? If you have an ATM machine, you just need one of those little covered things for people to use an ATM. It doesn't really matter how distinctive it is. But if we have a cool old building or a Chamber of Commerce building that's right on, is it Oklahoma Avenue? Yeah, that's a cool, distinctive building, right? And sense of place also is, do you feel like you're somewhere, or do you feel like you're anywhere? So built capital is kind of this idea of not just seeing jobs or income or taxes as a sense of economy, but also thinking about the place and the built environment, the things that we have that are around us, places we visit or occupy, as also part of the economy. The placemaking is an investment in built capital. And I'm not going to go into every single word of the slides, but placemaking events essentially is efforts to rejuvenate that built capital, right? A lot of towns, most towns are not an exception to this. A lot of towns did not invest or continue to invest in their downtown after World War II the way that they had prior, right? Cars became the norm, big box stores, strip malls, parking lot. That's totally fine, right? That's the way things went. And placemaking isn't saying, hey, we need to undo or erase the way we invested in our businesses and our building. It's more like we need to make sure we haven't forgotten about downtown, which is sort of this centerpiece of our culture and community. So I like this metaphor about downtown as the living room. I did my research on downtowns in Iowa, and one of the books I met with, she told me, I think of my downtown as the living room. When I have guests over and visit with me, they're rarely going to go up to my bedroom. They're not going to go up to the garage. They're not really going to see any part of the house except for the kitchen and the living room. And they're going to make an impression on me based on how clean my living room is. And I think that's true about people who come to our towns, right? Of course, there are towns where people never get off the freeway and they just visit your Loves or your Brahms or whatever. And fortunately for Alva, you're not too far off the freeway or too off the highway that downtown is impossible for people to visit. It's something that people are going to see. And so placemaking is about cleaning the living room, right? And every town has different levels of dirtiness, right? And I'm not going to find on anybody's, because that's just how we do things, right? But we know it when we see it. We know a clean living room. We know how they've really done some stuff to make their downtown distinctive, right? And we also know the ones where it's warm. They haven't really invested in this place since 1950, right? So I kind of have this quote, and I know I bet you've heard me say it before when I presented, but so the quality of Walmart, or the quality of whatever big box store chain that you think of, it reflects back on that store, right? But the quality of your Main Street or your central business district, courthouse square, or whatever you refer to it as, that reflects back on your town. So placemaking alone doesn't create jobs, but it's sort of, by cleaning the living room, you set the stage, or to mix metaphors, you set the table for those jobs and other investments to come in. And if you have that dirty living room, sometimes that prevents you from having those opportunities. Okay, so Main Street program. Who has been involved with or remembers when Alva had the Main Street program as part of their efforts, right? What was the year?
1980 something?
80s until what? Early 2000s? Anyway, doesn't matter too much, but I know y'all had it, and I know a lot of communities do that, right? Have the Main Street program for a while, kind of starts to feel like there's a diminishing returns on doing it, so then you stop. And then, sometimes people go back to it, so they do it, right? It's a community choice. I studied the Main Street program because I wanted to know, hey, a lot of folks do this. A lot of towns try this. Does it actually work? So I'm not going to say too much about about the Main Street program, other than it's this multifaceted program. I'll skip through these. Okay, so I did 3 essays in my dissertation, and this is 3 bullet points for an entire dissertation, 5-year, right? I looked at 3 different ways to measure, does placemaking or does downtown work, right? So I looked at jobs, and I looked in Iowa, and I found that statistically, won't say anything about math, I promise. I never try to do math, ever. But statistically, I'd found a strong relationship between adopting the Main Street program and job growth and establishment growth in the retail sector in the years thereafter. So that was the first one. The second one was looking at the jobs, looked at housing. And I'd found in most communities, this is when I was in Ohio, don't hold it against me, I got my PhD at Ohio State. So in most Ohio towns, there was sort of this distance relationship. The further you work from downtown, the more valuable the house is sold for. But in towns with an active Main Street program, that flipped, and houses closer to downtown became more valuable than the ones that were further away. Doesn't necessarily mean that we want to necessarily devalue houses further away and value them closer. It just means that if it's a strategy that you want, it's one that's efficient. And the final one is what I did was kind of looking at business survival in the decade following the Great Recession. I wanted to track all these businesses. This is a really lofty project where I did, I think, 8 states and is over, 20,000 businesses. And I wanted to see who survived in those 10 years, right? And I looked at both businesses that were freeway adjacent and one that were downtown adjacent. And the freeway adjacent ones did awesome, right? And kind of expect that, right? If they have that, if they're able to, especially if they're businesses that don't necessarily rely on a lot of customers and they're more kind of like getting trucks in, getting out, getting close to that freeway or highway was a rate. Being close to the downtown, actually, I found it wasn't good unless the downtown had a high concentration of sort of cultural amenities and hit that in sort of that heritage anchors, right? So the downtown revitalization is kind of like the saving grace for some of those downtown businesses. Because in general, downtown businesses, just on average, there's more churn. There's more, restaurants have a harder time staying open than sort of other types of business, right? So, okay, no more research. That's it, right? I just kind of wanted to sort of, for the people who care about, are you just talking how to, into your net? Or have you actually studied this? I have, and I think it's a valuable area to ponder. And in thinking about rural placemaking, I just want to hit home. Sorry, I don't want to embarrass anybody, but it is a kind of capital investment. And literally, I talked to John Ryerson when I was here a couple months ago, and we talked about the Hotel Bell Apartments, and the huge actual literal investment, right? And it was not just an investment into how people feel or how people regard the community. It was an actual investment into bricks and mortar and tons of materials. But so that sometimes it could be a very literal investment. Other times it is a more sort of intangible type of investment into, hey, we're going to put some real time and volunteer efforts and some sweat equity into making this the Western Oklahoma center, or not center, but the place people think of for a particular event or particular weekend, right? This is the place to be for whatever event, right? And so I know there's towns that really center themselves around rodeos, and towns that are really center themselves around harvests and other types of crops and commodities. So there's different types and degrees of capital investment, but placemaking is nonetheless an investment. So they can pave the way for other types of investment down the road, right? So you set the stage. You have places where people who want to teach at the university can live in a quiet, nice, comfortable apartment close to campus, walkable, right? That sets the stage for, hey, I need to see that in your town and make the next step, right? Or it could be you see the absence of something like that and you decide maybe not, right? And so placemaking is not necessarily an end-all be-all fix for everything, but it's definitely one of those things you can't afford not for. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up. I've already talked about Oklahoma Main Street. That's kind of the top of the mind when people think about placemaking, things you can do. I know there's not a whole heavy lot of tribal influence in this part of the state. There are some pretty cool programs some of the tribes are working on to do some placemaking. OSU Extension, we got some great extension educators here. A lot of what y'all might know them for is ag, trailing super sciences, and 4-H. But we do try to have a rural development footprint with Extension, and there are a couple of cool programs that Extension is trying to get off the ground. And then there's the odds and ends, what they said, with placemaking that you may or may not have heard of. There's cool projects everywhere you go where people are trying innovative things to set themselves apart, right? Okay. And so, all right. If anyone knows that Becky tries to do this awesome survey of World Challenges every year, I saw a graphic that he put out on Hughes LinkedIn or social media, and it's a good exercise that I think all of us should do, and where we try to think about what are the things we're struggling with, what are the things that we're not struggling with, right? So the way I like to think about this, though, is that challenges, unless you were hit by a tornado or a really bad sort of act of God or whatever, most of the challenges that we have are pretty common to everyone else. Whereas the assets are like gold, right? You can have a vein of the gold ore, right in your mind, right? And no one else is going to have it, right? So you got to think about what is it that if everyone's fighting with the same challenges, with population shrinking, businesses that are struggling, right? What are the things that no one else can lay claim to that y'all have, right? And sometimes it isn't obvious, right? A very obvious one would be the university. There are a couple of other college towns in the area, but, there's not a lot of them. And that's definitely something that Alva has as an asset, right? A steady stream of college-age kids, 9 months of the year, like a decent stream of professors and staff and faculty. That's a pretty nice anchor to have here. But what are some of the ones that are kind of not top of the mind, right? So the question is, what are the obvious things that folks in Cherokee and Winoka would be kind of jealous of, right? And what are the non-obvious things, right? A good example, anyone familiar with towns, Buffalo and Leuven. I went and did some, I was invited first to Buffalo. But they kind of seemed a little jealous of Leuven's commercial kitchen. And they were like, I want to do that, right? I'm not really sure exactly how much in terms of dollars and cents that the commercial kitchen in Leuven provides. But it was something that had caught their eye, right? So what are the things that Alva has? So I guess two things. What are the things that have caught y'all's eye that other towns are doing that you'd like to try to replicate, that you think wouldn't just be you know, sometimes things aren't replicable, but what are some things that are worth replicating? But also, what are some things that maybe some other folks would look at and say, man, Alva has that, we don't have that? So that's a good way of thinking about assets and challenges. All right, so some concluding words. This is my last slide, I promise. All right. So focusing on downtown is not about neglecting the non-downtown parts of town, right? There's a lot of parts of the community, both residential, commercial, industrial, agricultural. They're really important, and we should not neglect them. But downtown is that living room, like it or not. It's the place we kind of have designated culturally as what represents us. So placemaking can be a nice step towards high quality of life and economic development, but it's not necessarily an automatic job growth. And it definitely, even I'm thinking about Pawhuska, where they really, with the Pioneer one, Mercantile, and a couple other early things, they haven't all of a sudden usurped Bartlesville or Tulsa and the place to be. They're still what they are, but they've done a lot better job of being what they are. And so I don't want to say that, placemaking is this, silver bullet towards, overtaking Woodward and Enid as, the destination. This is a community that's more than likely going to stay in a sort of the same range of population. And that's a good thing, right? People usually don't want to all of a sudden explode in population, right? And so, but the trick is, how can you take advantage of being the best version of what you are? So the Main Street program is a good avenue towards revitalization, but there's a lot of steps you could do that are similar to being in the Main Street program that necessarily don't involve having to be part of it. And then finally, just kind of a party thought is Oklahoma has a lot of places that feel like you're somewhere, right? And placemaking is my sort of thing I like to spread the gospel of making sure people realize that there's not a lot of separating between somewhere and anywhere. And placemaking is one of those things that we can use to kind of hold on to being somewhere, so where people feel like, hey, I'm in Alva. I'm not just in, generic insert town name here. I'm in Alva right now. All right. Thank you very much. I have business cards, and also, I don't know, we have time for questions, or I'm open for whatever.
Is Pawhuska Main Street?
I think they are. I know a lot of their efforts and successes have kind of come externally, not necessarily from just being part of Main Street. It's also just kind of come from the popularity of that business. But I think they are a Main Street program. I think that might have kind of helped them channel those successes.
What is your role every in? What is your job description or job title? Can you describe what?
Oh, it changes every day. Today I got up and drove to Alva. I don't do that all the time. So I am not a teaching faculty. I have a half research and half extension appointment. So half the time I'm sitting behind my computer, looking at data, trying to make some heads or tails of a story, and then writing up a research finding about it. I think that's really rewarding, and it's one of the things I really like doing. The other half of the time, I am trying to kind of do the equivalent for rural development that the other extension state specialists would do for agriculture, right? So I'm not going out there and trying to, test out different seed variants or really help people understand different plant entomology and doing that. That's not what I do. But the rural development equivalent would be speaking at a chamber lunch, or trying to, I have a couple of workshops on data literacy, kind of helping small town administrators understand how to use census data and stuff like that. So kind of a mix and match. I saw it and over there.
Yeah. I know that government's in a lot of social media to draw people to Pawhuska. So what is the role of social media in drawing people and some of the downtown communities to Pawhuska? Just don't see a lot of that with mid.
Yeah. Well, I think there's two things. One, there's demand for people already to kind of visit the mercantile store, but that's only a small part of it, right? The next thing is, what else are you doing, right? Because if it were just that, then that would just benefit one business owner, and maybe a couple of different interests, right? But the idea behind revitalization, placemaking, is taking that asset of a little bit of buzz and trying to put more around it, right? Trying to get warm bodies downtown after 5 p.m., right? And so if there's something going on downtown, then social media could be a good channel for saying, hey, there's something going on, you're missing it right now. Are your kids annoying the tar out of you right now? There's a movie being projected on the side of the courthouse right now, right? Or something, there's a lot of things where they're pretty common and everyone does them. There's some stuff where they're innovative and people never, there's somewhere in Ohio, they have spooky puppy walk or something, and it's like a Halloween time that every Halloween they'll put dogs in costumes and have a little parade, right? Those are the kinds of things where they're silly, right? They're not necessarily something you're going to submit to the Library of Congress or whatever, but they're things that get people in your community, A, out the house, B, next to the businesses that hopefully have wisened up and stayed open that night because there's going to be people, and C, they build memories for the kids who, instead of saying, I'm going to go off to Stillwater or Norman and never come back to my town, like, man, this place does stuff that is suitable for me to have my kids grow up here and not just, I'm shuttling off to the next largest city. So, again, no silver bullets. I never want anyone to think that, hey, you put dog in costumes on Halloween and you're going to all of a sudden have, 100 new jobs and, Google's going to open up a data set. I don't ever try to promise stuff like that. But I do think that taking steps in the right direction, especially low-cost things, right? You get a couple volunteer hours and a couple maybe a bank to donate some money to just do some field tests of events like that. So,
can you give us an estimate for the Main Street program would cost in Alva?
I can't, not because I don't know. I think does anyone remember how much it cost back when y'all had Main Street?
Well, right now, we have, City Council has approved to be his Main Street has a new program that's more county-driven, and so we are participating with Woods County, it's in the Main Street program that way.
That's what I was.
And I think, Josh, the cost is, zero this year, but it's next year, it's only a few $100s, and then we can start to get that taste of make what Main Street could do for our community and then invest in Main Street program at a higher level. I know you have to hire is it full-time or part-time? It's at least part-time. Director of the Main Street program, and I think that, my understanding is that's probably the biggest primary investment.
So that's the big investment. And then in terms of membership, there's like an affiliate tier and an accredited tier. I think the affiliate is kind of what you're talking about. And I think accredited there's access to more materials. I don't think it breaks the bank. I think it's one of those things where you test it out. Is it working? Keep going. Is it not working? Well, you can kind of try to replicate what you saw, but maybe you're not going to have access to like the network and the email lists and all that kind of stuff. But it's not necessarily like they give you this magic potion and all of a sudden, hey, I paid $5,000, they're going to give me the necklace that I can, it is kind of just, I think it's the network effect, right? If you're kind of linked into that group, they do a lot of cool stuff and you can find out about stuff that you never would have heard of otherwise. So I'm glad to know that y'all are trying it out. That's good. I'm sorry. If you want to finish up your thought, no,
I have question.
Let the mirror go. I'm not. It's not my room.
Have it. Age before beauty. And it is.
So in your research, in the different communities that you've been to, what do you see as maybe one of the greatest opportunities for maybe this community?
Fundraising.
What? That. I hear boo.
Yeah, Bruno got plenty of all this pottery.
What?
I don't really know. I think there's something I don't get to see very often, which makes sense because people don't invite me to come to their town on a Thursday at 6 p.m. But I think because I think Thursday at 6 p.m. or Monday at 7:30, right? Is the town asleep or is it? Doesn't have to be fully lively, right? I'm not asking for Friday night numbers, right? But I think that's usually one of the biggest opportunities. Is I think my generation wants to do something past the work day, and It doesn't have to be every single business, because I know a lot of business owners want to be business owners so that they can close their doors at 5 or whatever. But I think that there's kind of a $20 bill on the sidewalk for businesses who would like to try to open their doors to accommodate the sort of people just hanging out nighttime. Doesn't have to be alcohol fueled, right? It can maybe be a mix of styles, but I think that's the one I most frequently see where I say, hey, what do you guys have? A brewery, or do you have just a restaurant that's open where people could be seated and just people could be conspicuously consuming, somebody can drive by and see, here's a restaurant open at night, right? That's an opportunity I think a lot of small towns, especially this size range, can take advantage of. I know that's a hard business, right? That's not a business where you open your doors and you say, oh, we're going to be around forever, right? It's tough just to keep a business open or to keep a restaurant open. But I think it's one of those things that kind of can set this community apart, especially with the colleges. So I know there's places kind of on the outside of town where the college kids like to go. And so I don't really know the ecosystem of everything, but I do think that's an opportunity. All right.
So my question was going to be, in your research, it stands to reason that where Main Street programs are active, that there are some successes to be told of.
Yeah.
I guess my question is, Main Street programs, though, are successful unless the participants and the business owners and property owner community are engaged. Is that a fair assumption, or does Main Street folk just make it happen? We could get a Main Street director, we could go and participate in Main Street programs, but we'll still have to have everybody buying in that these names are important to our community.
And that actually is kind of the essence of the Main Street program. I think that the money that you pay or the membership or whatever is kind of like a gym membership where it kind of forces you to use it. I think you need to have some sort of commitment, which is, taxpayer dollars funding a full-time director or a part-time director. That's the commitment that kind of draws you to say, all right, well, we're doing this, so let's commit to it, right? Because the Main Street program is, if you're trying to identify what is the program, it's volunteers, it's events, it's stuff like that. And so you're right. I think it's not just a matter of, are we gonna sign on the dotted line and just let the growth roll in? It's, are we gonna commit to this and make this part of our strategy and kind of get behind it as a community? And that's when things usually take off, right? So yeah.
Can you kind of explain the parallel idea with the chamber in Main Street? Because I can go out this whole, or that into one and not in it.
Well, the chamber, the jurisdiction, or the whatever you want to call it, the chamber is paying businesses, right? And the Main Street is a geographically bound jurisdiction, usually, right? A lot of chambers and Main Streets combine, and they try to serve both jurisdiction, or what's the not jurisdiction? Sure, both audiences are trying. And
that's territory.
Yeah, they try to, and so usually there's something returns to scale by merging them and having one front office, one reception person, that kind of stuff. But they do different things, right? And so one is fundamentally about the place, and one is fundamentally about the business of the businesses. And so I don't think they're necessarily at conflict, but definitely it's something you don't want to misstate as like, hey, I'm a downtown business owner. I deserve the same level of care and attention as dues paying chamber members that, and I'm not paying dues. So there's definitely, you want to make sure that you don't cross your wires, but I think there's a lot of towns that try to kind of figure that balance out as well. And y'all are great. I usually get like one question and all right, back to your seat. Cause
I thought the Alva was awesome.
I
didn't believe.
Oh, I never. That's flat. All right. Thank y'all for having me. Like I said, I have business cards. If anyone interested and want to email last question, that's what I'm here for, is to answer your economic development questions. And thanks for having me.
Okay.